Welcome to our exploration of the timeless story of Esther and its striking parallels to the contemporary challenges facing Israel in 2025, particularly in light of the ongoing threats from Iran. This series delves into the rich tapestry of biblical theology, ancient history, and current geopolitical dynamics, weaving together a narrative that highlights God's providence and the enduring resilience of His chosen people. If you find this journey insightful, we invite you to join our community by subscribing to our channel. Your support helps us continue to bring thought-provoking content that bridges the past with the present, fostering a deeper understanding of faith and history. Let's dive into the first part of this compelling story. In the ancient Persian Empire, under the reign of King Ahasuerus, widely identified by historians as Xerxes I, who ruled from 486 to 465 BCE, a dark cloud loomed over the Jewish people. Exiled from their homeland and scattered across the vast empire, the Jews faced an existential threat orchestrated by Haman, a powerful and ambitious court official. Haman, driven by personal vendetta and deep-seated hatred, manipulated the king into issuing a decree to annihilate every Jew man, woman, and child across the empire. This chilling plot, recorded in the Book of Esther, was not merely a political maneuver, but a calculated attempt to erase an entire people from existence. The story, set in the opulent yet perilous court of Susa, serves as a profound testament to the resilience of the Jewish people and the unseen hand of divine providence, a cornerstone of Christian theology that underscores God's sovereignty in guiding human history. The historical context of Esther's story is critical to understanding its depth. The Jewish people, following the Babylonian exile, were a minority in the Persian Empire, living under the shadow of a foreign power. Yet Christian theologians interpret this silence as a powerful testimony to God's hidden presence. The narrative illustrates the concept of divine providence, where God works through seemingly ordinary events and individuals to fulfill His purposes. Haman's decree, though devastating, was thwarted through a series of coincidences: Esther's rise to queenship, Mordecai's discovery of a plot against the king, and the king's sleepless night leading to Mordecai's recognition. These events, viewed through a Christian lens, reveal God's orchestration behind the scenes, ensuring the survival of His covenant people. For believers, Esther's story is a reminder that God remains faithful to His promises, even when His presence is not overtly manifest. The empire itself was a sprawling, multi-ethnic conglomerate, stretching from India to Ethiopia, governed by a complex bureaucracy and a king whose word was law. The Jews, though permitted to practice their faith, were vulnerable to the whims of those in power. Haman, as the king's chief advisor, wielded immense influence, and his personal grudge against Mordecai, a Jew who refused to bow to him, escalated into a genocidal campaign. This historical moment mirrors the precarious existence of minority groups in ancient empires, where survival often hinged on navigating treacherous political landscapes. From a theological perspective, the Book of Esther is unique in the Hebrew Bible and Christian Old Testament for its apparent absence of direct references to God. The parallels to modern-day Israel in 2025 are striking and sobering. Just as the Jews in Persia faced an existential threat, Iran has bolstered its influence through proxy groups such as Hezbollah in Lebanon and Hamas in Gaza, creating a multi-front challenge for Israel. Recent reports indicate that Iran has supplied advanced ballistic missiles to these groups, increasing the risk of coordinated attacks. In response, Israel has conducted preemptive strikes on Iranian military facilities, targeting nuclear research sites and missile production centers. These actions, while aimed at neutralizing the threat, have heightened regional tensions, with Iran retaliating through missile strikes on Israeli cities. The cycle of escalation mirrors the high-stakes drama of Esther's time, where a single misstep could have led to catastrophe. Israel today confronts significant challenges from Iran, a nation whose leadership has repeatedly expressed hostility toward the Jewish state. Since the 1979 Islamic Revolution, Iran's government has positioned itself as a regional adversary to Israel, often framing its rhetoric in apocalyptic terms. In 2025, tensions have escalated due to Iran's continued pursuit of nuclear capabilities, despite international sanctions and agreements aimed at curbing its program. Israeli intelligence reports, corroborated by Western allies, indicate that Iran has made significant strides in its nuclear ambitions, raising fears of a potential weapon that could threaten Israel's existence. Much like Haman's decree, Iran's actions are perceived by Israel as an existential danger, not merely a political dispute, but a threat to the survival of the Jewish nation. The geopolitical landscape of 2025 amplifies these concerns. Theologically, many Christians view Israel's modern struggles through the lens of biblical prophecy and covenant theology. The Jewish people, as God's chosen nation, are seen as central to his redemptive plan, a belief rooted in passages like Genesis 12 verse 3, where God promises to bless those who bless Abraham's descendants and curse those who curse them. For some, Iran's hostility represents a contemporary manifestation of the spiritual and physical opposition faced by the Jews in Esther's day. Just as Haman sought to destroy the Jews, Iran's actions are interpreted by some Christian communities as part of a broader cosmic struggle. Yet, the Book of Esther also challenges believers to trust in God's providence, even when the outcome's uncertain. The absence of overt divine intervention in Esther encourages faith in God's unseen guidance, a principle that resonates with those praying for Israel's protection in 2025. The modern parallels extend beyond the threat itself to the dynamics of power and survival. In ancient Persia, the Jews' survival depended on Esther's courage and Mordecai's wisdom, as well as the goodwill of a foreign king. Similarly, Israel's defense against Iran relies on strategic alliances, particularly with the United States, which provides military aid, intelligence, and diplomatic support. In 2025, the U.S. has played a critical role in intercepting Iranian missiles and bolstering Israel's Iron Dome defense system. However, political shifts in the U.S., including debates over foreign policy priorities under the Trump administration, introduce uncertainties, much like the unpredictable favor of Ahasuerus in Esther's time. These alliances, while vital, underscore Israel's precarious position in a region where it is often isolated. Theologically, many Christians view Israel's modern struggles through the lens of biblical prophecy and covenant theology. The Jewish people, as God's chosen nation, are seen as central to his redemptive plan, a belief rooted in passages like Genesis 12 verse 3, where God promises to bless those who bless Abraham's descendants and curse those who curse them. For some, Iran's hostility represents a contemporary manifestation of the spiritual and physical opposition faced by the Jews in Esther's day. Just as Haman sought to destroy the Jews, Iran's actions are interpreted by some Christian communities as part of a broader cosmic struggle. Yet, the Book of Esther also challenges believers to trust in God's providence, even when the outcome is uncertain. The absence of overt divine intervention in Esther encourages faith in God as unseen guidance, a principle that resonates with those praying for Israel's protection in 2025. The modern parallels extend beyond the threat itself to the dynamics of power and survival. In ancient Persia, the Jews' survival depended on Esther's courage and Mordecai's wisdom, as well as the goodwill of a foreign king. Similarly, Israel's defense against Iran relies on strategic alliances, particularly with the United States, which provides military aid, intelligence, and diplomatic support. In 2025, the U.S. has played a critical role in intercepting Iranian missiles and bolstering Israel's Iron Dome defense system. However, political shifts in the U.S., including debates over foreign policy priorities under the Trump administration, introduce uncertainties, much like the unpredictable favor of Ahasuerus in Esther's time. These alliances, while vital, underscore Israel's precarious position in a region where it is often isolated. The story of Esther also highlights the role of individual agency within God's plan. Esther's decision to risk her life by approaching the king was a pivotal moment, driven by her faith and courage. As Israel confronts the multifaceted threat from Iran, the lessons of Esther remind us of the enduring hope that God's purposes will prevail, even in the face of overwhelming odds. This sets the stage for exploring how Esther's courage and the Jewish people's resilience continue to inspire and inform the modern struggle for survival. In 2025, Israeli leaders, such as Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, face similar high-stakes decisions. Netanyahu's public statements emphasize Israel's right to self-defense, framing military operations against Iran as necessary to prevent another Holocaust, a historical trauma that resonates deeply with the Jewish people. These leaders, like Esther, navigate a delicate balance between boldness and diplomacy, seeking to protect their nation while avoiding a broader regional conflict. The historical and theological threads of Esther's narrative, divine providence, human courage, and the survival of God as people find echoes in the geopolitical realities of 2025. In the opulent yet treacherous court of ancient Persia, a young Jewish orphan named Esther emerged as an unexpected hero, defying the odds to save her people from annihilation. Her story, chronicled in the Book of Esther, is a testament to courage, faith, and the subtle workings of divine providence. As a woman in a patriarchal society and a Jew in a foreign empire, Esther's rise to queenship and her pivotal role in thwarting Haman's genocidal plot highlight the power of ordinary individuals to effect extraordinary change. In 2025, as Israel faces existential threats from Iran, Esther's story resonates, profoundly offering historical, theological, and contemporary insights into the resilience of the Jewish people and the leaders who, like Esther, step into perilous roles to defend their nation. Esther's story unfolds in the 5th century BCE, during the reign of King Ahasuerus, in the Persian capital of Susa. Orphaned and raised by her cousin Mordecai, Esther was an unlikely candidate for queenship. Yet, through a series of events, her selection in a royal beauty contest, and her favor with the king, she ascended to a position of influence in one of the ancient world's most powerful empires. The Persian Empire, sprawling from India to Ethiopia, was a complex tapestry of cultures, governed by a king whose decrees were irrevocable. For the Jewish exiles, living as a minority in this vast empire, survival depended on navigating a precarious balance of assimilation and fidelity to their identity. Esther's elevation to queen was not merely a stroke of luck, but a critical juncture in the survival of her people. When Haman, the king's chief advisor, orchestrated a decree to exterminate the Jews, Esther faced a daunting choice: remain silent and risk her people's destruction, or approach the king uninvited and act punishable by death. Mordecai's challenge to her, "Who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this," underscored her unique role. Her decision to act, preceded by fasting and prayer, transformed her from a passive figure into a courageous advocate, embodying the Jewish principle of pikuach nefesh and setting the stage for divine intervention. From a Christian theological perspective, Esther's story is a masterclass in divine providence, the belief that God orchestrates events to fulfill his purposes, often through human agents who may not fully grasp their role. Her decision to risk her life was not predestined. It required her to overcome fear and act decisively. This balance is a cornerstone of Christian theology, which holds that God's plans unfold through the free choices of individuals. Esther's reliance on prayer and fasting further underscores her dependence on God's guidance, a model for believers facing overwhelming challenges. Her story invites reflection on how God positions people, often those least expected, for pivotal roles in his redemptive plan. his hidden presence through the coincidences that aligned to save the Jews, Mordecai's discovery of a plot against the king. The book of Esther, notably absent of direct references to God, illustrates Esther's favor with Ahasuerus and the king's timely recognition of Mordecai. For Christians, this narrative reinforces the idea that God works through unlikely individuals, equipping them for moments of crisis. Esther's courage reflects the biblical call to faith in action, as seen in James 2 verse 17, where faith without works is deemed dead. Esther's story also speaks to the tension between divine sovereignty and human responsibility. In 2025, Israel's struggle against Iran as multifaceted threats mirrors the high-stakes drama of Esther's time. Just as Esther was an unlikely hero, modern Israeli leaders, such as Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, embody a similar resolve to confront existential dangers. Iran's pursuit of nuclear capabilities, coupled with its support for proxy groups like Hezbollah and Hamas, poses a threat that Israeli officials compare to the Holocaust, a modern echo of Haman's genocidal intent. Netanyahu, like Esther, operates in a high-risk environment, making decisions that could determine Israel's survival. His public addresses, including those at the United Nations, emphasize Israel's right to preemptive self-defense, framing Iran's nuclear ambitions as a direct challenge to the Jewish state's existence. The parallels extend beyond individual leadership to the broader dynamics of power. In ancient Persia, Esther's influence depended on her relationship with Ahasuerus, a foreign ruler whose favor was not guaranteed. Similarly, Israel's defense strategy in 2025 relies heavily on alliances, particularly with the United States, which provides critical military and intelligence support. Recent U.S. assistance in intercepting Iranian ballistic missiles and bolstering Israel's Iron Dome system reflects this partnership. However, political shifts in the U.S., including debates over foreign policy under the Trump administration, introduce uncertainties akin to the unpredictable court of Ahasuerus. Israel's leaders, like Esther, must navigate these alliances while maintaining national sovereignty and security. In 2025, Iran's actions have escalated tensions in the Middle East to a critical point. Despite international efforts to curb its nuclear program, Iran has advanced its uranium enrichment, raising fears of a potential nuclear weapon. Just as Esther's intervention required strategic timing and courage, Israel's leaders must balance military action with diplomatic efforts to avoid broader regional war. The involvement of global powers, including the U.S. and European nations, adds another layer of complexity as sanctions and negotiations with Iran remain contentious. The threat of Iran closing the Strait of Hormuz, a vital oil choke point, underscores the global stakes, much like the empire-wide implications of Haman's decree in ancient Persia. Israeli intelligence, supported by Western allies, has identified key nuclear facilities as targets, leading to a series of covert and overt operations, including airstrikes on Iranian military sites. These actions, while aimed at neutralizing the threat, have provoked retaliatory missile attacks from Iran, targeting Israeli cities like Tel Aviv and Haifa. The conflict has also drawn in Iran's proxies, with Hezbollah launching rockets from Lebanon, further complicating Israel's defense strategy. This cycle of escalation mirrors the tension in Esther's story, where Haman's decree set the stage for a potential massacre. For Christian audiences, Esther's story offers a lens to interpret Israel's modern challenges. Many believers see Israel as central to God's covenant promises, rooted in passages like Genesis 17 verse 7, where God establishes an everlasting covenant with Abraham's descendants. Her story, rooted in ancient history and illuminated by Christian theology, finds a striking parallel in Israel's leaders in 2025, who confront Iran's threats with resolve and strategic alliances. Just as Esther acted for such a time as this, modern leaders navigate a complex geopolitical landscape to ensure Israel's survival. The interplay of divine providence, and human agency in Esther's narrative offers hope that, even in the darkest moments, God's purposes will prevail, guiding his people through crisis toward deliverance. Iran's hostility, viewed through this lens, is not merely a geopolitical conflict, but part of a spiritual battle against God's chosen people. Yet, Esther's example also calls for humility and prayer, urging believers to seek God's guidance for all involved, including the Iranian people, many of whom suffer under their regime's policies. The narrative challenges Christians to trust in God's providence while supporting efforts to protect life and pursue peace. Esther, as transformation from an orphan to a queen who saved her people, underscores the power of courage and faith in the face of overwhelming odds. In the ancient Persian court, Haman, a high-ranking official under King Ahasuerus, stands as a chilling archetype of enmity, driven by pride and hatred to orchestrate the genocide of the Jewish people. His plot, detailed in the Book of Esther, was not merely a personal vendetta against Mordecai, but an attempt to eradicate an entire nation, threatening the survival of God's covenant people. In 2025, Israel faces a modern adversary in Iran, whose leadership has consistently expressed hostility toward the Jewish state, often framed in existential terms. This parallel between Haman's ancient malice and Iran's contemporary threats weaves together biblical theology, historical context, and current geopolitical dynamics, highlighting the enduring struggle of Israel against forces seeking its destruction and the theological hope of divine deliverance. In the 5th century BCE, the Persian Empire, under Ahasuerus, was a vast and diverse realm, encompassing myriad peoples, including the Jewish exiles scattered after the Babylonian conquest. Haman, elevated to the position of chief advisor, wielded immense power, second only to the king. His animosity toward Mordecai, a Jew who refused to bow to him due to his faith, spiraled into a genocidal decree to annihilate all Jews across the empire. This edict, sealed with the king's signet ring, was irrevocable under Persian law, setting a date for the systematic slaughter of an entire people. Haman's actions were rooted in personal pride and ethnic hatred, exploiting his authority to target a vulnerable minority. The historical setting amplifies the gravity of Haman's plot. The Jews, living as exiles, had limited political influence and were dependent on the goodwill of the Persian court. Haman's ability to manipulate Ahasuerus reflects the precarious existence of minorities in ancient empires, where a single powerful figure could sway policy to catastrophic ends. The decree's empire-wide scope, spanning 127 provinces, underscored the existential nature of the threat, leaving the Jews with little recourse but to rely on divine intervention and human courage as embodied by Esther and Mordecai. From a Christian theological perspective, Haman represents a biblical archetype of evil, opposing God's chosen people and, by extension, God's redemptive plan. The Book of Esther portrays him as a figure akin to Satan, whose schemes ultimately fail against divine providence. His downfall, being hanged on the gallows he built for Mordecai, illustrates a recurring biblical theme: the self-destructive nature of evil. Psalm 7 verse 15 to 16 speaks to this, stating that those who dig a pit for others will fall into it themselves. For Christians, Haman's defeat is a testament to God's faithfulness to his covenant with Israel, as promised in Genesis 12 verse 3, where those who curse Abraham's descendants face divine judgment. The absence of God's name in Esther does not diminish its theological weight. Instead, it emphasizes divine providence working through human actions and historical events. Haman's plot, though formidable, was undone by a series of coincidences: Mordecai's loyalty, Esther's courage, and the king's favor pointing to God's unseen hand. This narrative encourages believers to trust in God's sovereignty, even when facing seemingly insurmountable threats, a perspective that resonates deeply with Israel's modern challenges. In 2025, Iran emerges as a contemporary parallel to Haman, posing a multifaceted threat to Israel's existence. Since the 1979 Islamic Revolution, Iran's leadership has consistently framed Israel as an illegitimate Zionist entity, with figures like former Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khomeini and his successors calling for its destruction. In 2025, Hezbollah's arsenal of precision-guided missiles supplied by Iran has escalated cross-border attacks, while Hamas has intensified rocket barrages from Gaza. These actions echo Haman's empire-wide decree, as Iran's network of proxies seeks to encircle and destabilize Israel. Recent Iranian missile strikes on Israeli cities, in retaliation for Israel's operations, have further escalated tensions, raising the specter of a broader regional conflict. This rhetoric, coupled with tangible actions, mirrors Haman's genocidal intent. Iran's pursuit of nuclear capabilities, despite international sanctions, has heightened fears in Israel, which views a nuclear-armed Iran as an existential threat akin to Haman's decree. Intelligence reports from 2025 indicate Iran has advanced its uranium enrichment to near weapons-grade levels, prompting Israel to launch preemptive strikes on nuclear facilities and military sites. Beyond its nuclear ambitions, Iran exerts influence through proxy groups like Hezbollah in Lebanon and Hamas in Gaza, creating a multi-front challenge for Israel. The geopolitical dynamics of 2025 underscore the complexity of the Israel-Iran conflict. Israel's military operations, including targeted assassinations of Iranian nuclear scientists and airstrikes on missile production sites, aim to disrupt Iran's capabilities while avoiding all-out war. The United States, Israel's primary ally, has provided critical support, including missile defense systems and diplomatic backing at the United Nations. Yet, under the Trump administration in 2025, U.S. policy has been inconsistent, oscillating between calls for de-escalation and tacit approval of Israel's strikes. This ambivalence mirrors the unpredictable favor of Ahasuerus, whose initial support for Haman shifted only through Esther's intervention. Meanwhile, Iran's alliances with Russia and China complicate the geopolitical landscape, as these powers seek to counter Western influence in the region. These actions, supported by intelligence from the United States and other allies, reflect Israel's determination to neutralize the threat, much as Esther and Mordecai worked to counter Haman's plot. However, Iran's responses, missile attacks and threats to close the Strait of Hormuz, a critical global oil choke point, highlight the broader implications of the conflict, impacting energy markets and international stability. The role of global powers adds another layer of complexity. For Christian audiences, the parallel between Haman and Iran invites reflection on the spiritual dimensions of Israel's struggle. Many believers view Israel as central to God's covenant promises, with its survival tied to biblical prophecies about the restoration of the Jewish people. In 2025, while the outcome of the Israel-Iran conflict remains uncertain, Esther's story inspires confidence in divine providence. Just as Haman's gallows became his own undoing, Israel's defensive actions, coupled with international vigilance, may yet thwart Iran's ambitions. The theological call is to trust in God's sovereignty while advocating for justice and peace. Iran's hostility, like Haman's, is seen by some as part of the spiritual battle against God's plan, with the Jewish state as a focal point. The historical, theological, and geopolitical threads of Esther's story illuminate Israel's modern struggle, highlighting the resilience of a nation under siege and the hope of divine deliverance. As Israel counters Iran's nuclear ambitions and proxy warfare, the lessons of Haman's defeat remind us that evil, though formidable, cannot prevail against God's purposes. This sets the stage for exploring how alliances and courage, as seen in Esther's time, continue to shape Israel's defense in the face of contemporary adversaries. Yet Esther's story also calls for intercession, urging Christians to pray for peace, wisdom for leaders, and protection for all affected. including civilians in Iran caught in the crossfire of their regime's policies. The narrative's climax, Haman's downfall, offers hope that evil, though powerful, is ultimately self-defeating. Haman's genocidal plot in ancient Persia and Iran. Esther's threats in 2025 share a chilling intent: the destruction of the Jewish people. In the Book of Esther, the survival of the Jewish people hinged on a delicate interplay of divine providence, human courage, and strategic alliances. Esther's bold intervention, supported by her cousin Mordecai and the favor of King Ahasuerus, turned the tide against Haman's genocidal plot. Her call for her people to fast and pray, coupled with a risky approach to the king, exemplifies the synergy of faith and action in averting disaster. In 2025, as Israel navigates existential threats from Iran, this ancient narrative finds striking parallels in the nation's reliance on international alliances, military strategy, and spiritual resilience. By weaving together Christian theology, ancient history, and contemporary geopolitics, we see how Esther's story illuminates Israel's modern efforts to counter Iran's aggression, underscoring the enduring role of allies and divine guidance in times of crisis. In the 5th century BCE, the Jewish exiles in Persia lived under the shadow of a vast empire, where their survival depended on navigating the whims of a powerful king. Esther, a Jewish orphan elevated to queenship, stood at the heart of this precarious dynamic. Ahasuerus ruled over 127 provinces, and his court was a complex web of advisors, bureaucrats, and competing interests. The Jews, as a dispersed and marginalized group, had little direct power, making Esther's access to the king a critical lifeline. Her success hinged on her ability to leverage this relationship, navigating cultural and political barriers to secure protection for her people. This dynamic mirrors the challenges faced by minority groups in ancient empires, where survival often required aligning with sympathetic authorities or exploiting moments of favor. Her decision to approach Ahasuerus uninvited, risking death, was preceded by a call for communal fasting and prayer, uniting the Jewish people in a spiritual act of solidarity. This preparation, combined with Mordecai's guidance and the king's eventual favor, enabled Esther to expose Haman's plot and secure a counter-decree allowing the Jews to defend themselves. The king's support, though initially swayed by Haman, became a pivotal alliance, illustrating how external power could shift the balance in favor of a vulnerable minority. Historically, the Persian Empire's structure amplified the significance of such alliances. From a Christian theological perspective, Esther's story underscores the interplay between divine providence and human agency. While God's name is absent from the text, his presence is evident in the orchestration of events: Esther's queenship, Mordecai's loyalty, and Ahasuerus' change of heart. Her alliance with Ahasuerus, though fraught with risk, became a conduit for divine deliverance, suggesting that God's plans often unfold through imperfect human systems. For Christians, this narrative offers hope that God can work through international alliances and human efforts to protect his covenant people, even in the face of formidable threats. This reflects the Christian belief in God's sovereignty, working through human actors and institutions to fulfill his purposes. Esther's call for fasting and prayer aligns with biblical teachings on seeking divine guidance in crisis, as seen in passages like 2 Chronicles 7 verse 14, which promises God's response to humble prayer. Her reliance on the king's favor also illustrates how God can use secular authorities as instruments of his will, a theme echoed in Romans 13 verse 1, where governing authorities are seen as established by God. Theologically, Esther's story challenges believers to trust in God's unseen guidance while actively engaging in the world. In 2025, Israel's defense against Iran's multifaceted threats relies heavily on strategic alliances. The U.S., under the Trump administration, has provided military aid and diplomatic backing, including vetoing anti-Israel resolutions at the United Nations. However, Political shifts in Washington introduce uncertainties as debates over U.S. involvement in Middle Eastern conflicts persist. This ambivalence echoes the unpredictable favor of Ahasuerus, whose initial support for Haman required Esther's intervention to redirect. Israel also engages with other allies, including European nations and moderate Arab states like the United Arab Emirates, which, through the Abraham Accords, have normalized ties and collaborated on countering Iran's influence. These partnerships, like Esther's alliance with the king, are vital for Israel's survival in a hostile region, particularly with the United States, mirroring Esther's dependence on Ahasuerus. Iran's pursuit of nuclear capabilities, coupled with its support for proxy groups like Hezbollah and Hamas, poses an existential challenge to Israel. In response, Israel has conducted preemptive strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities and military sites, often with intelligence and technological support from the U.S. These operations, including cyber attacks and targeted assassinations, aim to disrupt Iran's capabilities while avoiding a broader regional war. The U.S. has also bolstered Israel's Iron Dome and Arrow missile defense systems, intercepting Iranian ballistic missiles targeting cities like Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. The geopolitical landscape of 2025 underscores the critical role of these alliances. The Israel-Iran conflict in 2025 is a high-stakes chess game with global implications. Iran's retaliatory missile strikes in response to Israel's operations have escalated tensions, raising fears of a broader conflict that could disrupt global energy markets, particularly if Iran closes the Strait of Hormuz. The involvement of Iran's allies, such as Russia and China, complicates the equation, as they provide diplomatic cover and economic support to Tehran. Meanwhile, Israel's allies, led by the U.S., face pressure to balance support for Israel with efforts to de-escalate the conflict through diplomacy. Recent negotiations, mediated by European powers, have sought to revive constraints on Iran's nuclear program, but progress remains elusive. This dynamic mirrors the delicate balance Esther navigated in the Persian court. Just as she had to persuade Ahasuerus without alienating him, Israel must maintain its alliances while asserting its right to self-defense. The global stakes economic stability, energy security, and regional peace underscore the complexity of intervention, much like the empire-wide implications of Haman's decree. Israel's success depends not only on military prowess, but also on diplomatic finesse, ensuring that allies remain committed despite competing interests. For Christian audiences, Esther's reliance on prayer and alliances offers a model for engaging with modern crises. Many believers view Israel's survival as tied to God's covenant promises, as articulated in Genesis 17 verse 7 to 8, which establishes an everlasting bond with the Jewish people. In 2025, Israel's reliance on allies like the U.S. and its own strategic actions reflect a similar interplay of human effort and divine guidance. The historical and theological lessons of Esther's story illuminate Israel's modern struggle against Iran, highlighting the power of alliances and the hope of divine providence. As Israel navigates this perilous landscape, Esther, as example, inspires faith that God can use both human courage and international partnerships to protect His people, paving the way for exploring the ultimate hope of deliverance in the face of ongoing threats. The threats from Iran, seen through this lens, are part of a broader spiritual battle, yet Esther's story encourages intercession for all involved. Christians are called to pray for Israel's protection, wisdom for its leaders, and peace for the region, including for Iranian civilians who suffer under their regime's policies. The narrative also invites trust in God's providence, believing that He can work through nations and leaders, as He did through Ahasuerus, to achieve His purposes. Esther's intervention, supported by prayer and the king's favor, transformed a dire situation into a story of deliverance. The book of Esther culminates in a triumphant reversal. The Jewish people, once condemned to annihilation by Haman's decree, are saved through Esther's courage, Mordecai's wisdom, and divine providence. This victory, celebrated annually in the Jewish festival of Purim, stands as a testament to God's faithfulness and the resilience of his chosen people. In 2025, as Israel confronts ongoing threats from Iran, the echoes of Esther's story resonate deeply, offering historical, theological, and geopolitical insights into the Jewish state's struggle for survival. While the modern conflict remains unresolved, the narrative of Esther provides a lens of hope, illuminating Israel's efforts to counter Iran's aggression and the enduring promise of divine deliverance. By weaving together Christian theology, ancient history, and contemporary analysis, this final part explores the outcomes of Esther as victory and their parallels to Israel's aspirations for peace and security in a turbulent world. In ancient Persia, the Jewish people faced an existential crisis under Haman's genocidal decree, sanctioned by King Ahasuerus. Through Esther's daring intervention and Mordecai's strategic guidance, the tide turned. Ahasuerus issued a counter-decree, allowing the Jews to defend themselves, leading to their victory over their enemies on the 13th of Adar. This deliverance, recorded in Esther 9, gave rise to Purim, a festival of joy and gratitude, where Jews commemorate their survival through feasting, charity, and the reading of the Megillah. The historical significance of this outcome lies in its demonstration of the Jews' resilience as a minority in a powerful empire, where their survival hinged on divine favor, human agency, and the goodwill of a foreign ruler. The Persian Empire's vastness, spanning 127 provinces, made the Jewish victory remarkable, as it required coordination and courage across diverse regions. The reversal of Haman's plot, with his execution on the gallows he built for Mordecai, underscores a historical pattern of poetic justice, where oppressive schemes backfire. Purim became a symbol of hope, affirming the Jewish people's enduring identity and their ability to overcome existential threats, a theme that resonates with Israel's modern challenges. From a Christian theological perspective, the story of Esther is a powerful narrative of divine providence and God's covenant faithfulness. Despite the absence of God's name in the text, his presence is evident in the orchestration of events. Esther's rise, Mordecai's loyalty, and the king's favor culminating in the Jews' deliverance. Haman's defeat illustrates the biblical principle that evil, though formidable, is ultimately self-defeating, as echoed in Psalm 37 verse 12 to 15, where the wicked plot against the righteous, but face divine judgment. For Christians, Purim is a call to intercede for Israel, seen as central to God's redemptive plan, and to pray for peace and justice for all nations. The festival's emphasis on community, charity, and gratitude further underscores the Christian call to love one's neighbor, even in times of conflict, extending hope to both the oppressed and those caught in the crossfire. This aligns with the Christian belief in God's sovereignty, as seen in Romans 8 verse 28, where all things work together for good for those who love God. Purim reflects the fulfillment of God's promise to preserve his covenant people, as articulated in Genesis 17 verse 7, ensuring their survival against forces seeking their destruction. Theologically, Esther's story also challenges believers to embrace hope amid adversity. In 2025, Israel's conflict with Iran remains a central challenge, with no clear resolution in sight. Iran's pursuit of nuclear capabilities, coupled with its support for proxy groups like Hezbollah and Hamas, poses an existential threat, reminiscent of Haman's decree. Recent reports indicate that Israel's operations have delayed Iran's nuclear program, with key facilities damaged and scientific personnel targeted. However, Iran's proxies continue to pose a multi-front threat, with Hezbollah launching rockets from Lebanon and Hamas intensifying attacks from Gaza. The international community, led by the United States, has supported Israel through military aid and diplomatic backing, but political shifts, such as debates over U.S. involvement, under the Trump administration introduced complexities akin to Ahasuerus' initial wavering in Esther's story. Israel's preemptive strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities and military targets have disrupted Tehran's ambitions, but they have also provoked retaliatory missile attacks on Israeli cities, escalating tensions. The potential for Iran to close the Strait of Hormuz, a vital oil choke point, threatens global economic stability, mirroring the empire-wide stakes of Haman's plot. Despite these challenges, Israel's resilience, bolstered by advanced defense systems like the Iron Dome, and international support echoes the Jewish victory in Esther's time. The outcome of Israel's efforts remains uncertain, much like the precarious moment before Esther's intervention succeeded. The geopolitical landscape of 2025 highlights the delicate balance Israel must navigate. Its alliances, particularly with the U.S., have been critical, with American technology and intelligence enhancing Israel's defense capabilities. Israel's leaders, like Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, channel Esther's resolve, framing their actions as necessary to prevent another Holocaust. The global stakes, economic, political, and humanitarian underscore the need for wisdom and restraint, as unchecked escalation could harm millions, including civilians in Iran, suffering under their regime's policies. The Abraham Accords have also fostered cooperation with moderate Arab states like the UAE, creating a regional counterweight to Iran's influence. Yet, diplomatic efforts to curb Iran's nuclear ambitions, mediated by European powers, have yielded limited progress as Tehran remains defiant. The risk of escalation into a broader regional war looms large, with potential consequences for global energy markets and international security. This dynamic parallels the strategic maneuvering in Esther's story, where the Jews' survival required both Esther's bold intervention and Ahasuerus' support. For Christian audiences, Esther's victory and the celebration of Purim offer a lens to interpret Israel as modern struggle. Many believers see Israel's survival as tied to God's covenant promises, with passages like Jeremiah 31 verse 35 to 37 affirming the enduring nature of his commitment to the Jewish people. This calls believers to advocate for humanitarian efforts, supporting those impacted by the Israel-Iran conflict, regardless of nationality. The festival's joy reflects a forward-looking hope, trusting that God's providence will guide nations toward peace, much as it delivered the Jews in Persia. Iran's hostility, viewed through this lens, is part of a spiritual battle, yet Esther's story encourages intercession for peace and justice. Christians are called to pray for Israel's protection, wisdom for its leaders, and compassion for all affected, including Iranians burdened by their government's actions. The narrative's hope lies in the assurance that God's purposes prevail, even in unresolved conflicts, as seen in the ultimate defeat of Haman. Purim's emphasis on community and charity also resonates with Christian teachings on loving one as neighbor. The triumph of Esther's story, celebrated in Purim, mirrors Israel's ongoing struggle against Iran in 2025. The historical victory over Haman, achieved through courage, alliances, and divine providence, offers hope that Israel's efforts, bolstered by international support and strategic resolve, can counter modern threats. Her courage, alliances, and divine providence inspire hope that Israel's strategic efforts and international support will prevail. For Christians, this story affirms God's faithfulness, urging prayer for peace and justice. Join us at Bible Wars Decoded to explore more biblical insights and their modern parallels. Subscribe today to stay connected. Theologically, the narrative affirms God's faithfulness, encouraging believers to trust in His sovereignty while praying for peace and justice. As Israel navigates an uncertain future, Esther's legacy inspires resilience and hope, pointing to a future where God's purposes, like a candle burning brightly at the Western Wall, illuminate the path to deliverance and reconciliation for all. Esther's triumph, celebrated in Purim, mirrors Israel's resilience against Iran's threats in 2025. Heindao Y Fan Ben.